All right, so this is a supplemental video for Management 4950 for the Wednesday lecture because I was discombobulated due to my power being out and a million things going wrong all at once, and I apologize for that. But I wanted to try to give at least a supplemental video going through my notes, hopefully to make them make a little bit more sense for you as we continue through this class. I want everybody to have the opportunity to um, have the same information. And so hopefully this suffices. All right. So first of all, I want to discuss the 33 ideas that are in your module for this week. And where's my share button? Of course. Here, I'll just pull it up over here. This will be easier this way. And let me expand this out. Try to at least. Well, that'll work, I think. Okay, so she's not working. I am sorry. I'm going to have to stop the share and try it all over again by making sure it's open full screen first before we move forward with that. Here we go. Now we've got it. Now I'll just start the share again. So in your resources for this week in the module, you have a behavioral guide, and that's supplemental information. Okay, it's written by the author, and in it he goes through a number of ideas that will help you, and it's broken down by each of the stages of psychological safety. This week we're looking at the stage 1, inclusion safety, and there's things on here such as teach inclusion as a human right. A human need and right. If you think about it, being treated fairly and equitably truly should be seen as a human right. It's essential that we treat people with the same dignity that we ourselves want to receive. And you see this actually promoted in many different religions. I do know that in Christianity, there's a passage in the New Testament, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And by that logic, if you want people to treat you horribly, then you treat others horribly. And since we know that's not the case, nor is it the intent of what that sentence is supposed to mean, we know it actually means that if we want to be treated fairly and equitably, we need to treat others fairly and equitably also. So anyway, he goes through these different ideas, and it gives you moments, snippets of the concepts to look at from the author's point of view in more detail. So use this when you're working on your assignments, especially when it calls for the behavioral guide or the 33 ideas, and use that. It's got lots of good resources here. So, and as a manager, if you were to apply even part of these as a manager, as a leader, your team would thank you immensely. Now, let me get back to having my notes available. At some point in time, I think I might show a clip to the class from a series called MASH, M-A-S-H. It's from the 70s and 80s, but in there's a lot of interpersonal situations, communication, there's systems at play, psychological safety, lack of psychological safety, and it makes for a good resource. And since it was broadcast television, it should be pretty safe to use in a classroom, I hope, right? Anyway, we talked about stories. Clark, in his book, discussed that the effects of stories, they impact the team, the organization immensely, because these are tied to the group's identity, organizational identity. Some organizations have in their past skeletons in their closet. Maybe they were racist. Maybe they were sexist. Maybe they used child labor. Who knows? In the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had a lot of organizations doing some really poor things. And you have a researcher named Frederick Winslow Taylor, and he looked at how an organization could be efficient. He wasn't worried about human rights, human dignity, or anything like that. He looked, how can an organization make the most money And unfortunately, people got caught up in the machinery, quite literally at times, especially with the production of cotton products, because you had to have these special weavers, and they were so low to the ground that children would be sent under there to clean out clogs and things like that. Well, many children died because of the machinery, scraping and doing stuff right over their heads. And if they came up just a little bit too far, that was it. So we don't want to employ poor managerial principles and processes anymore. But those stories remain in a lot of corporations that are, 175 years old, even 50 years old. Because when we got into the time period of the 60s with the civil rights movement, those protests that led to the civil rights laws being passed in America, these people were protesting for a reason. It's because there was no fair treatment, no equitable treatment. And so organizations dating back before that time, they have these skeletons in their closet. And an organization does not or should not try to hide them. Leaders should not try to hide them. Rather, be straightforward. Say, in the past, this organization did do some very unsavory things. However, we realized that this was a problem, and so we sought to change it. This is how we tried to change it. This is where we are now, and this is what we're still doing to continue making these changes going into the future. This is important because these stories really tie into how a person identifies themselves. Social identity theory, as researched out by Tafel et al., the researcher et al means and also, or and along with, if I remember my at Latin. So Tafel was the main researcher, and he had a team of researchers with him, and they studied social identity theory and came up with this as an actual theory. We get part of our identity, personal identity, through the organizations that we belong and work to, through the social groups we're a part of. And we have to acknowledge the fact that not all these groups have been ethical through the years. They may be ethical now, but we don't need to hide the fact that they were unethical in the past. As a matter of fact, hiding these problems only creates more problems in the future when people dig through resources and say, wait a minute, this organization did what? And you guys were hiding it? Okay, so you got better, but you didn't need to lie about it. You didn't need to hide it. So don't lie, don't hide. Let the story be what the story is. And hopefully there's the end of that story is one that is positive and good and showing that the organization and the leaders put human beings as being on the same level, as being equal. Now, leader-member exchange theory, this shows that the quality of the established leader-team member relationship impacts the overall outcome of the organization. This, along with the next few points I'm going to bring an outcome from Viganelli et al. 2018, and the reference is in the reference section of the notes that I posted. Viganelli et al. Discussed the need for a 360-degree feedback system. This is actually a bidirectional feedback channel in which the lowest person to the highest person can give feedback, and it gets all through the whole entire organization. This is essential because, I'm sorry, I'm just a little sweaty. My apartment's a little warm. I have electricity, but my AC is loud, so I have it turned off right now. This 360-degree feedback system is essential because the janitor might have some good points and things that might make the organization better. The CEO might have some good points, and they need to be shared within the organization. Plus, it creates an environment that promotes transparency. Nothing is worse than trying to hide details, facts, and feedback in an organization. Viganelli also pointed out that the behavior displayed by leaders influences those who follow. Have you ever had a leader who is a very poor leader, a bad leader, a toxic leader, a narcissistic leader? Well, we all have, I'm sure. it probably demoralized you and others in the organization. This creates a very difficult scenario to increase employee satisfaction, increase employee motivation, and customer satisfaction. You want to, as a leader, display the high qualities that you want from your staff. Poor leadership behaviors, they create distance within a system. And this distance, according to Viganelli et al., can be perceived as either being social or psychological distance. And it always seems to go right back to the leader-follower physical distance, meaning in these organizations, these poor leadership in these organizations leads to the followers distancing themselves from the poor leaders. Many times, organizations that have a major turnaround problem, it's called attrition, you see that qualified individuals are leaving because they know they can go get a job at another company. Who are left? Which staff is left? It's the poor performing employees, the employees that don't really care, the leaders that don't care. They stay because they know they can't just go get a job anywhere. So they remain. This just drives the whole organization down further into a pit of poor treatment. We talked about transactional and transformational leadership, which was also presented by Viganelli et al. Now, transactional leadership is you do X, Y, and Z, and I reward you with A, B, and C. Yeah. Yes, that ties back into expectancy theory, which we have, I believe we spoke about before. But is that the kind of leadership you really want to be under? One that you feel you have got to purchase being treated fairly? No. Now, transformational leadership, this was also presented by the researchers, and there's a lot of positive results here. And what happens here is a leader tries to transform their team into being better than they are. Maybe lead people so they can take over more senior positions. Maybe even my position as a leader. Maybe I should train you up so you can take my position as a leader. Yes, I might wind up going and having to get another job, but I've created a stronger organization. Because if I stay with one organization too long, I'm going to get stagnant. I'm going to become stale. There's going to be decreased innovation. So you want fresh leadership coming in. You want this on a regular basis. When I say regular basis, every few years, give or take. But you want to reward the good employees by lifting them up. Maybe it's helping them to transform into being better than they are by giving them some time so they can go to college or whatever it is that they need to get certifications so that they can expand their career, become more marketable as an employee. Now, smaller teams tend to have better overall results. This is because if you have 150 people on a team, you're not all going to be communicating. You're not all going to be working in the same direction. But if you got a small team, it's so much easier to keep that team focused into on the direction they need to be headed to, on the things they need to be working on. So maybe a larger team needs to be broken down into smaller ones, more functional teams that are designed for a specific purpose, a specific part of the process that the organization is working on. Sense making is very important here. Sense making literally is how we make sense of the environment around us, the organization around us, how we perceive things. This ties back to the stories. The stories, the organizational stories, have a lot to do with preparing people for sense making. How can I make sense of the future plans that are laid out in the mission and vision statements if I don't know the stories of where the organization came from and the skeletons in the closet that had to be dealt with? So sense making, this concept is going to come back up again a few more times. So keep an eye out for that. Now, relationships between leaders and members, these are very essential in understanding how leadership is very beneficial or lacks that beneficial edge. So inclusion safety can have a great impact in these relationships because you're including people into a social environment, a social sphere. You're including them into there based on the fact that they are human beings, and that being the one point of criteria. So think about racism. Think about how organizations could have internal stories about how they used to exclude people based on race. Now, if an organization is forthright with that information and with the subsequent ways they worked at repairing it and fixing and changing their racist ways, that could be a good thing. Whereas if an organization hides it and is still being racist, then it just shows they have a track record of racism, and maybe the employees should be a lot more careful in choosing to work for that organization. I do want to point out, though, that some organizations require you to go through an initiation, so to say, to join that particular, to be included in that organization, in that group. The military is one. You cannot be a soldier if you did not go through boot camp. You cannot be a sailor if you did not go through boot camp. This is because there's specific skills that are needed to be a soldier and to be a sailor. But once you've got that basic training done, the one criteria for admission is being human. So please bear in mind, there are positions such as being a doctor, a lawyer, even a college professor, a soldier, a sailor, etc., that require you to have some sort of skill or ability before you can be admitted to that group. That is not the same thing as saying that somebody is worthy. To be worthy to be a soldier or a sailor, you have to be human, obviously physically fit, etc., for obvious reasons. But the skills to be a soldier and sailor, they teach you. And once you finish your basic training, you are a soldier, you are a sailor. A lot of organizations are similar. You want to work at a hospital as a doctor? Well, you have to have a medical degree and have done your residency and your internship. But once you have that and you go to the organization, the hospital you want to work for, really it comes down to being human. If that organization applies psychological safety. Now, let's turn the table a little bit. Think about social groups that require their members to prove their worthiness before they are admitted into being considered included in that organization. Is that organization literally, actually, in all reality, psychologically safe? No, it is not, because it ascribes worth based upon external factors. And once again, the whole thing about being a doctor so that you can work at a hospital, that's not the same thing as what we're talking about here. Otherwise, we'd have janitors suddenly becoming doctors, and we wouldn't have good medical health care. A lot more people would be dying in the hospital. So we got to use some common sense there also. But let's kind of move on here. So back to social identity theory. We include people in our in-group or exclude people into other groups based upon the social identity and the social exchange, that's social exchange theory, of that organization. If we want to have a truly inclusive organization, then we want to avoid the in-group and the out-group. As a matter of fact, everybody's going to be part of the in-group. Everybody in that organization. And the out group should not exist, because when people get put into being in the out group, they begin to self-censor. That means they don't contribute feedback. They don't contribute ideas, creativity, innovation. They sit there and they come in, they do their time on the clock, and then they leave for the day. They don't add to the the overall worth of the organization because they've been treated as a substandard individual. So we need to avoid that by understanding that each person that comes into that needs to be included into the in group and not pushed away. Many things can cause people to be pushed away. Organizations have used, obviously, they've used racism, sexism, they've used ageism. That's where if a person is over the age of 40, they are not included in the in group. Things like that. What religion somebody is, that should not be a determining factor of inclusion or not, but oftentimes it is, and it should not be. Political affiliation. These things should not matter when you're dealing with an organization, a corporation, a for-profit corporation. Even nonprofits to a point need to be careful about that. Although I would say that for a nonprofit that is a Christian organization, you probably want to make sure that you don't have atheists in there. I mean, that makes sense. Once again, we go back to using logic. Now, understanding yourself as a leader is so essential. I recommend when I teach leadership that people do leadership self-assessment surveys or assessments on themselves. Self-assessments. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry. I think the heat is getting to me. But self-assessments. You got to know yourself. Above the temple doors going into Delphi in ancient Greece, it said, know thyself, only written in Greek. You got to know yourself if you're going to be in leadership. Now, if you're going to be a follower, it is beneficial to know yourself, but it's not as essential as it is for the leaders. Why? Because leaders lead by example. They lead people to do things. They motivate people to accomplish things. They need to know how they themselves are motivated. They need to know their moral compass, their ethos. So take the time to sit down and go through what really makes you tick as a person if you want to be a leader. And once you are a leader, do this regularly. I try to do it about every 6 months or so because life happens. We grow, we adapt. So I've got to keep up with where I'm currently at in my own mind so that I can best lead others in humility. A good leader doesn't lord their position over their staff, but rather brings their staff alongside and lifts them up, helps transform them to become something better and greater than they are. Some resources that are really good: Hofstede's Cultural Dimension Study, Tropinner's Cultural Dimension Study, Strengths Finder. Now, the first two you can find at mindtools.com or .org. It's one of the two. Sorry about that. And the last one, Strengths Finder, you find at Strengths Finder 2.0. You put in Strengths Finder, one word, 2.0. It's going to give you some good resources. That last one particularly in conducting self-assessments. You can also do the Myers-Briggs Personality Type Indicator, the MBTI. While these personality assessments are not 100% correct, but they're not 100% wrong either. What they do is they give you a kind of like an opening of a toolbox. They show you more about which tools you have inside yourself, and maybe shows you which ones you should add and which ones you need to use less. And so it's just another tool to know more about yourself. It's not the end all. So I'm going to end there. This was supposed to be just a little brief video to try to give a little bit of context behind some of the notes and to hopefully make up for my faux pas, my error the other night. I once again apologize. I thank you for being part of this class, and I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Remember, Monday is a holiday, so there will be no classes on campus Monday. So this particular class, I will see you on Wednesday. Did I get that right? Yeah, I did. Thank you. You have a great evening.